Well, I would start out by saying that how is it that first song went? I don't feel tired anymore. Here it is. Here's a note. I don't feel no ways tired. And I think the inspiration of this group, this gathering today, is so supportive of world peace and so hopeful, given what has happened at the BRICS and at other venues, that it's okay not to feel tired no more. Let me refer back to the fellow who got me down to Washington initially. His name is President John F. Kennedy. He asked those of us who had something special to give to our country to come on down and give it. Now, when John Kennedy addressed the United Nations, it was on September 20th, 1963. He was thinking of these issues. He was talking about the UN rising to its responsibility to help reduce tensions and hold back the darkness. I have come to salute the United Nations, said John Kennedy, and to show support of the American people for your daily deliberations. Whoa. Well, I think most people realize that the UN has fallen into a state of disrepair. The influence of the Western powers, the colonial powers, if you will, is so predominant, even in UN organs like the IAEA, the International Agency for Atomic Energy, or the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. They cannot act honestly because of the pressure they feel from the main powers. Those are recent examples. If you go back to 2003, when the U.S. wanted to attack and invade Iraq on false pretenses, the head of our Signals Intercept Agency, the National Security Agency, sent an email to its British counterpart, GCHQ, and said, we have to monitor, we have to get something on the people in the Security Council because they won't approve this escapade into Iraq, and we have to get some dirt on them so that we can persuade them to approve it. And this applied not only to the permanent members, of course, but to the ones that were filling in the Security Council at the time. That email was leaked. It was leaked before the war, and yet the war started. Suffice to say that it took a couple of years, but the Secretary General of the UN did say this war was illegal. Well, hello, of course it was illegal. What else? Well, I would simply say that no longer can anyone get by with saying, well, we're going to do a coalition of the willing. It doesn't matter if the Security Council doesn't go along with us. We're just going to go ahead and do it ourselves, like, maybe Poland, Lithuania, or maybe we'll fix up Ukraine. That's not going to work anymore because of the BRICS growth, because of the BRICS power, and because the BRICS represent the majority of humankind. This is big. This is not what used to be the case. So there's some shining hope in this area. And I'd like to just add a couple of things from John Kennedy. He talked about the need for peace at this UN General Assembly meeting there on September 20th, 1963. He said, look, it's never too late. It's high time that disputes were taken off the debating schedule and placed on the negotiation table. Okay. Well, that applies today in spades to the situation in Ukraine. It's necessary to get over the rhetoric and over the debates and get to the negotiation table before the rest of young Ukrainian men fall on the battlefield, and Russian men too. So it's very clear what needs to happen. And what BRICS can do is create a counterweight. Now, can they work through the UN? Well, I would say that Russia and China have been fastidious in not simply brushing aside the UN despite the obstacles, despite the fact that they were deceived, for example, when they were asked to abstain on a measure to keep flights not going in Libya, a no-fly zone. They were deceived. You know what happened to Libya. But they keep on holding the UN up as a legitimate organization despite the problems, despite what's going on. Now, also in this speech, John Kennedy raised the question of a joint exploration of the moon. In other words, here at the UN, he was saying, look, it's not something that one body should do or one country. We should go together and sort of pool our energies, our expertise. There's no reason why we should duplicate our scientific efforts here. Let's go together to the moon. Now, that didn't work out. We know that the US did go to the moon. Now, all this morning is understandably very, very heavy, okay? And so I'm going to break this heaviness just momentarily with an apocryphal story, especially since we hear late news that there were going to be some space shots to the sun. And one comedian said, well, I hope there's no intent to land on the sun. And the other comedian said, oh, don't worry. They're going to go during the nighttime. End of lame joke. Back to seriousness. We have to hold hands on this. We have to give it time. We have to be patient. It was made clear that BRICS was 30 years in the making. It's very much in the making now. Give it time. Make sure that people realize in the world that it's not a case of isolating Russia or China or Russia and China. It's actually the West has self-isolated, and this winter is going to be very cold in Western Europe, and the people there are finally going to wake up and figure out what happened to them. So what I would like to do is say that we need to cooperate on these things, as John Kennedy once offered. John Kennedy is still very much alive in my consciousness. I think his ideas have no expiration date. I think we have to keep trying. And in every tradition, every faith tradition, and I must compliment Father Berry for making this clear. There's an adage which says you're supposed to love your enemies. Going back to Confucius, it was the old adage of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And so we do need to extend and hold hands, not give up, especially with the growth of BRICS and other salutary developments that we can see through the clouds. And I'll just finish by including something that I tacked on to the end of a briefing that I gave at the UN Security Council back in February 21, I think it was. I referred to the bitter struggle between black and white in our country, and how very gifted black leaders rose to the occasion, and through the black-run African American church liberation movement, justice of a kind, not full justice yet, but justice of great measure was achieved. And the way we do that in our country and the way we do that internationally is to join hands, is to sing the old song, we're going to keep on loving our enemies. We're going to keep on loving our enemies. We're going to keep on loving our enemies. Never falling back. Never falling back. So let's make the effort, you know? There is an adage that the Chinese always use, and that is, let's have a win-win, you know? There's enough in this world to share. Why don't we have a win-win? That would be loving our enemies to the nth degree. Let's hold out hope that we can do that. And with the empowerment of so many people in the BRICS movement and outside, we can achieve a different world from the rules-based international order. One last thought. 2 days ago, Jens Stoltenberg, the head of NATO, got up before the EU Parliament. And he said what he usually says, we have to prevail against the evil forces of the East, and we have to make sure that Ukraine wins this war. And one of the parliamentarians, he was an Irish representative, he raised his hand. And this is what he said, 2 sentences. Mr. Stoltenberg, at the Vilnius summit, it was declared that the Chinese are trying to subvert the international rules-based order. Now, it criticizes China for being opaque. Get that? Opaque about its strategy and its intentions. My first question, Mr. Stoltenberg, is how is it possible to subvert an order, the rules-based order, that has no basis whatsoever in international law? Well, I have to say that I identify with that. What people have to ask these days is, you can't make stuff up, okay? The international rules-based order is who makes the rules? Well, we know who makes the rules. So we have to be upfront. We have to love our neighbors to be sure, but we have to be very direct in exposing their duplicity as we move forward toward peace, as we hold hands and try to make this a better world. Thank you very much for listening.